Did medieval people believe in astrology? Yes, but it wasn't what you think it is. It wasn't a little column in the back of a magazine. It was a serious, complex field of study. It was a science. In fact, for most of the Middle Ages, it was impossible to separate astrology from astronomy. They were two sides of the same coin. Astronomy was the part that involved observing and calculating the movements of the planets and stars. Astrology was the part that interpreted what those movements meant for life on Earth. You couldn't have one without the other. To be an astronomer was to be an astrologer. The entire medieval worldview was built on this connection. They believed in a universe with the Earth at its center. This is called the geocentric model, and it came from the ancient Greek thinker Ptolemy. In this model, the Earth was still and everything else moved around it in perfect circles. Closest to us was the Moon, then Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. These were the 7 known planets, or wanderers. Beyond them was a sphere of fixed stars, which included the 12 constellations of the zodiac. And beyond that was the realm of God. This wasn't just a physical map of the cosmos. It was a map of influence. The core idea was that the celestial bodies, the planets and stars, had a direct effect on the world below. This idea came from the simple observation that the sun governs the seasons and the moon governs the tides. If these two great lights had such obvious power over the Earth, it seemed perfectly logical that the other wandering stars would have their own more subtle influences. They believed that everything in the heavens was connected to everything on Earth. As above, so below. This wasn't a fringe belief, it was mainstream intellectual thought taught in the new universities that were springing up across Europe. So how did it work? Medieval astrology was a system of incredible complexity. An astrologer would need to know advanced mathematics and have access to detailed charts, called ephemerides, that track the positions of the planets. The key tool was the horoscope. A horoscope wasn't a prediction for your day, it was a map of the heavens at a precise moment in time. The most important horoscope was the natal chart, cast for the exact moment of a person's birth. This chart was a circle divided into 12 sections, called houses. Each house represented a different area of life: personality, wealth, siblings, parents, children, health, marriage, death, travel, career, friends, and enemies. The astrologer would then plot the positions of the 7 planets and the zodiac signs within these houses. The zodiac was seen as a great belt in the sky through which the planets traveled. Each of the 12 signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so on, had its own unique character. Aries was fiery and warlike, ruled by the planet Mars. Taurus was earthy and stubborn, ruled by Venus. The interpretation was a delicate art. The astrologer had to consider which planet was in which sign and in which house. Was Mars, the planet of war, in the house of marriage? That can mean a difficult relationship. Was Jupiter, the planet of good fortune, in the house of wealth? That was a very good sign. They also had to calculate the angles, or aspects, between the planets. Were 2 planets in opposition, creating tension? Or were they in a harmonious trine, creating ease? It was a massive, 3-dimensional puzzle. This system was also deeply connected to the basic understanding of the physical world. Medieval thought was dominated by the idea of the 4 elements: fire, earth, air, and water. These elements weren't just in the world around them, they were inside the human body. This was the theory of the 4 humors. A person's health and temperament were determined by the balance of 4 fluids in their body. Blood, which was hot and moist like air, made you sanguine or cheerful. Phlegm, cold and moist like water, made you phlegmatic or calm. Yellow bile, hot and dry like fire, made you choleric or angry. Black bile, cold and dry like earth, made you melancholic or sad. And here's the crucial link: each of the planets and zodiac signs was also associated with these elements and qualities. That Mars was hot and dry. The moon was cold and moist, so the position of the planets at your birth didn't just shape your destiny. It shaped your fundamental physical and psychological makeup. It determined your unique balance of humors. Astrology wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about understanding the present. It was a framework for understanding personality, health, and one's place in the divinely ordered, interconnected cosmos. It was a blend of mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. It was a serious attempt to understand the rules of the universe. While the ideas of astrology might have been in the air for everyone, its actual practice was mostly for the rich and powerful. Creating a detailed astrological chart required a great deal of skill, expensive books, and precise instruments. This was a job for highly educated specialists, and they didn't come cheap. Kings, queens, popes, and wealthy merchants were the primary clients of the medieval astrologer. For them, astrology wasn't a fun diversion, it was a critical tool of governance and strategy. Imagine you are a medieval king. Your life is filled with uncertainty. Will your harvest be good this year? Is this a good time to go to war with a neighboring kingdom? Will your newborn son survive to become a strong heir? Is the person you're about to marry a good match for you and for the stability of your realm? These were life and death questions. Any tool that promised to provide some insight, some advantage, was worth its weight in gold. Astrology offered that promise. It was the medieval equivalent of data analysis or strategic forecasting. One of the most common uses of astrology was in electional astrology. This is the practice of choosing the most auspicious time to begin something. A king wouldn't just decide to have his coronation on a random Tuesday. He would command his court astrologer to study the heavens and find the perfect moment. A moment when Jupiter, the planet of kings and good fortune, was strong and well placed. A moment when Mars, the planet of conflict, was weak. Starting a reign under a good sky was seen as essential for ensuring a long and successful rule. The same was true for warfare. Before launching a military campaign, a ruler would want to know the astrological weather. An astrologer would be consulted to determine the best day and hour to march. They would analyze the position of Mars to understand the potential for violence and victory. They would look at the moon's phases. Starting a major undertaking on a waning moon was often seen as a bad idea. This wasn't just superstition, it was considered essential military intelligence. Guido Bonatti, a famous 13th century Italian astrologer, advised military commanders on everything from when to start a siege to when to sally forth from a besieged city. His advice was taken as seriously as that of any general. Royal marriages were another area where astrology was vital. These marriages were political alliances, not love matches. The compatibility of the couple was a matter of state security. Astrologers would compare the natal charts of the potential bride and groom. They would look for harmonious connections that suggested a fruitful union and a stable partnership. They would also look for warning signs of conflict or tragedy. Catherine de' Medici, the powerful queen of France in the 16th century, was a famous patron of astrologers, including the famous Nostradamus. She reportedly relied on their advice for all major political and personal decisions, deeply believing that the stars held the keys to her family's destiny and the future of France. Even the founding of cities and the construction of important buildings were timed according to the stars. The first stone of a cathedral or a castle would be laid at a moment carefully chosen by an astrologer to ensure the structure's strength and longevity. The belief was that the character of the moment of inception was imprinted on the thing being started, whether it was a person, a reign, a war, or a building. This reliance on astrology at the highest levels of society had a huge impact. It meant that the best minds were often engaged in its study. It drove innovation in mathematics and astronomy, as better planetary tables were needed for more accurate predictions. It also placed the astrologer in a position of immense power and influence. They were the trusted advisors, the secret keepers, the ones who could whisper in a king's ear about fate and fortune. Of course, this was also a dangerous position. If a prediction failed, or if a chosen time turned out to be disastrous, the astrologer could easily find themselves blamed, imprisoned, or worse. The stars might hold the secrets of power, but advising the powerful was a risky business. Today, if you get sick, you go to a doctor who might take your blood pressure or order an X-ray. In the Middle Ages, if you got sick, you went to a physician who would almost certainly check your astrological chart. The link between medicine and astrology was not just strong, it was fundamental. For a medieval doctor, it was impossible to properly diagnose or treat an illness without first understanding the patient's relationship with the cosmos. This field was known as iatromathematics or medical astrology. The foundation of this practice was the theory of the four humors, which we've touched on. Your body was a little world, a microcosm, that reflected the big world, the macrocosm. Just as the world was made of four elements, your body was made of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was a state of perfect balance among these humors. Sickness was the result of an imbalance, too much of one, not enough of another. Since the planets and zodiac signs were also linked to these elemental qualities, they were believed to have a direct influence on the body's humoral balance. A person born when Mars was prominent might have an excess of yellow bile, making them prone to fevers and anger. The most powerful and common visual aid for this system was the zodiac man. You can still see this image in medieval manuscripts. It's a drawing of a human figure with the 12 signs of the zodiac pointing to the parts of the body they were believed to rule. The system was surprisingly specific. Aries, the ram, ruled the head. Taurus, the bull, ruled the neck and throat. For Gemini, the twins ruled the arms and shoulders, Cancer ruled the chest, Leo the heart and back, and so on, all the way down to Pisces, the fish, which ruled the feet. This wasn't just a curious diagram, it was a practical diagnostic tool. If you came to a physician complaining of a headache, he would immediately consider the influence of Aries and its ruling planet Mars. If you had stomach problems, he would look to Cancer and the moon. The location of the pain was a direct clue to the celestial forces at play. The doctor's first step would often be to cast a decumbiture chart. This was a horoscope drawn up for the exact moment the patient took to their bed with the illness. The physician would ask, "When did you first feel sick?" and lie down. That moment was considered the birth of the disease. By analyzing this chart, the doctor believed he could understand the nature of the illness, its likely course, and its ultimate outcome. The position of the moon was especially important. Its phase and its position in the zodiac were thought to reveal the severity of the crisis. Based on this cosmic diagnosis, the physician would then devise a treatment plan. And this is where astrology became critically important for day-to-day medical practice. The timing of any medical procedure was paramount. The guiding principle was to never ever treat a part of the body when the moon was passing through the zodiac sign that ruled it. For example, if you had a problem with your eyes, which were also ruled by Aries, you would not want to have them treated when the moon was in Aries. This was thought to be incredibly dangerous, as the moon's influence would intensify the problem. This rule applied to the most common of all medieval medical procedures, bloodletting. Doctors believed that letting out a small amount of blood could help rebalance the humors. But when and where to let the blood was an astrological calculation. A physician would consult his almanac and his charts to find the perfect day and even the perfect hour. He would choose a vein connected to the afflicted part of the body, but would only proceed if the celestial alignments were favorable. Administering medicine, mixing herbs, performing surgery, all these things were scheduled according to the stars. A doctor who ignored the heavens was considered ignorant and reckless. Medical schools and famous universities like Bologna and Padua required their students to master astrology. To be a good physician, you first had to be a good astrologer. It was an essential part of the job. The relationship between the Christian church and astrology was deeply complicated. It was a long tangled history of acceptance, condemnation, and uneasy compromise. On the one hand, the official theological position was one of deep suspicion. On the other hand, many popes, cardinals, and bishops were avid consumers of astrological advice. This contradiction gets to the very heart of the medieval intellectual world. The church's primary objection to astrology was theological. The core problem was the issue of free will versus determinism. If the stars at your birth determined your entire life path, your character, your actions, your ultimate fate, then where did human choice fit in? And more importantly, where did God's grace fit in? Christianity taught that humans were given free will by God to choose between good and evil. Your salvation depended on your choices, but if your choices were already written in the stars, then the entire concept of sin, repentance, and divine judgment seemed to fall apart. Astrology, in its most deterministic form, seemed to make a mockery of human responsibility and divine omnipotence. It put the power in the hands of impersonal celestial bodies, not a personal God. Early church fathers, like St. Augustine, were fierce critics of astrology. Augustine argued passionately against it, calling it a form of demonic deceit. He saw it as a remnant of pagan fatalism that was incompatible with Christian faith. For centuries, this was the official line. Church councils repeatedly condemned divination and the practice of trying to foretell the future using the stars. It was seen as a dangerous superstition that could lead people away from God. However, the reality on the ground was much murkier. As the sophisticated astrological texts of the Greeks and Arabs were translated into Latin and began to flood into Europe from the 12th century onwards, Christian scholars couldn't simply ignore them. This was a powerful and intellectually coherent system. It seemed to explain so much about the world. So a compromise began to emerge. Theologians and thinkers started to draw a careful line. They divided astrology into two types: natural astrology and judicial astrology. Natural astrology was considered largely acceptable. This was the study of the stars' influence on the natural world. It covered things like predicting the weather, understanding the tides, and its application in medicine. The argument was that God created the heavens to have an influence on the physical world, including the human body and its humors. The stars could affect your body, your health, and your temperament. This was just part of God's created order. It wasn't seen as a challenge to faith, any more than saying the sun causes sunburn would be. Judicial astrology was the part that remained forbidden and heretical. This was the astrology that claimed to predict specific future events or to judge a person's eternal fate based on their horoscope. This was the part that denied free will and interfered with God's divine plan. It was one thing to say the stars might make you prone to anger. It was another thing entirely to say you were fated to commit a murder. The great theologian Thomas Aquinas articulated what became the most widely accepted compromise. He formulated the idea that the stars incline, they do not compel. In Latin, astra inclinant, non necessitant. This was a brilliant piece of intellectual footwork. It allowed for the influence of the stars on human temperament and disposition, but it preserved the ultimate power of human free will and God's grace to overcome those inclinations. A wise person, Aquinas argued, could understand their astrological inclinations and through reason and faith choose to rule over them. The stars might propose, but the human soul could dispose. This compromise allowed astrology to flourish in Christian Europe, even within the walls of the church itself. Many churchmen were also scholars, physicians, and astronomers. They studied and practiced natural astrology without seeing a conflict with their faith. There were popes in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, like Sixtus IV and Julius II, openly employed astrologers to help them choose auspicious dates for important ceremonies and political moves. They managed this by insisting they were only using astrology as a guide to understanding natural influences, not as a way of predicting a sealed fate. And it was a fine line, and one that was often crossed, but it allowed the science of the stars and the faith in God to coexist in a tense but workable truce. So far, we've talked about kings, scholars, and doctors. These were the educated elite who could read the complex texts and afford the services of a professional astrologer. But what about the vast majority of the population? What about the farmer, the blacksmith, the weaver? Did they believe in astrology, and if so, what did it mean to them? For the common person in the Middle Ages, astrology was not about having a personal natal chart drawn up. Most people didn't even know the exact time of their birth. Literacy was low, and the complex mathematics of casting a horoscope were far beyond their reach. Their experience of astrology was much more practical, more general, and deeply woven into the fabric of folklore, agriculture, and daily life. It was less about individual destiny and more about the rhythm of time. The main way astrological knowledge trickled down to the general populace was through almanacs. With the invention of the printing press in the 15th century, cheap pamphlets and almanacs became widely available for the first time. These were some of the first bestsellers. An almanac was a calendar for the coming year, and it was packed with useful information. It listed feast days and saints' days, but it also contained a wealth of astrological advice. This advice was simple and direct. The almanac would tell you which days were lucky and which were unlucky for certain activities. It would provide a simplified version of medical astrology, often with a drawing of the zodiac man, advising you on the best times for bathing, cutting your hair, or letting blood. It would give agricultural guidance based on the phases of the moon and its position in the zodiac. There were right times to plant certain crops, right times to harvest, right times to geld an animal or wean a child. This was astrology made practical for an audience whose main concerns were health and harvest. For example, folk wisdom, reinforced by the almanacs, held that you should plant root vegetables during the dark of the moon, when its energy was thought to draw things downward into the earth. Leafy crops that grew above ground should be planted when the moon was waxing, its energy pulling things upward. This kind of belief blended seamlessly with older pre-Christian folk traditions about the importance of the moon in the cycles of nature. Astrology provided a new, more scientific-sounding language for these ancient practices. The influence of the planets was also understood in a very general way. People knew that Saturn was associated with misfortune, old age, and melancholy. Days thought to be ruled by Saturn were considered unlucky or dismal days, best avoided for starting any new project. Jupiter, on the other hand, was lucky and benevolent. Mars was for strife, Venus for love, and Mercury for commerce and communication. These broad associations became part of the cultural background noise. You didn't need a detailed chart to know that starting a business on a day ruled by Jupiter felt like a better bet than starting one on a day ruled by Saturn. So, for the average person, astrology wasn't a tool for self-discovery in the modern sense. It was a guide for navigating the world. It was a way of aligning your own small life with the great sweeping cycles of the cosmos. It provided a sense of order and timing in a world that was often chaotic and unpredictable. It told you that there was a right time for everything, a cosmic rhythm that you could tap into for a better outcome. In the end, the belief in astrology in the Middle Ages was not one single thing. It was a spectrum. At the top, it was a complex mathematical science, a tool of power, and a sophisticated system of medicine and philosophy. For the church, it was a theological problem to be carefully managed, and for the common person, it was a practical set of rules for living, a way of understanding the seasons of life in the land. It was a shared worldview that connected the mightiest king to the humblest farmer, all living under the same influential sky. They didn't just believe in astrology, they lived within it. It was the air they breathed, the framework that gave their world meaning.